Well, over the weekend, you might have seen that I was on TVNZ's Q&A with Jack Tame. And when you do media interviews, generally you come out of them and there's two things that generally you think about. The first is to make sure that you haven't said something that totally destroys your career, which fortunately I hadn't. But the second thing is you sort of go through the questions and the answers and you think about the things that you wish you'd answered maybe clearer or better answer, been more prepared. And when I came out of the interview from Q&A on Sunday, there were three areas that I thought I would like to have had more time to expand on. So let me share those with you. Let's expand on them as part of McBLOG today. So the first thing was that Jack Tame was keen to ask my understanding of the term discrimination because the court had said this. Family First had advocated a particular version of the family, being the traditional man-woman marriage. Its purposes are discriminatory. It advocates for measures to prefer the traditional family to the disadvantage of others. Now, discrimination, very negative word, isn't it? You discriminated. But hang on, isn't there positive discrimination? Do we give preference to certain groups for scholarships? Yes. Can we employ certain people or put certain people on boards of businesses to encourage diversity? You bet. In fact, Section 73 of the Human Rights Act talks about anything done or admitted which would otherwise constitute a breach of any of the provisions of this Act. In other words, discrimination shall not constitute a breach if it is done or admitted in good faith for the purpose of assisting or advancing persons or groups of persons, etc. So the law does talk about positive discrimination, those persons or groups that may need assistance or advancement in order to achieve an equal place. In June last year, the New Zealand Medical Association adopted a new position statement on admission to medical school, and it strongly supported affirmative action selection policies, what you might call positive discrimination. It's still discrimination. And the chair said this: several sections of the population, including Māori, Pacific peoples, and those from rural communities, are grossly underrepresented in the current medical workforce. Diversity of the medical workforce is beneficial for meeting the health needs of diverse populations. So discrimination is okay, sometimes. Now, I guess the question is, what is discrimination? Well, according to Washington University, for attitudes, positive discrimination involves having a higher regard for those with factor X than for those without X. And negative discrimination involves having a lower regard for those with factor X than for those without X. Well, if you can figure out the meaning of discrimination, you'll see that maybe that's why I struggled a little bit answering it. But without a doubt, Family First has higher regard for marriage and the rights of children to know and be raised by their biological parents wherever possible. It's not always, but to positively discriminate in favour of the best model based on decades of research is vital in society. And note, even the Court of Appeal acknowledged that Family First, and I quote, Family First recognised the contribution non-traditional forms of family life can make, end quote. And so many of the issues that we cover, screen time, family dinners, childcare, gender theory, critical race theory, they have nothing to do with family structure, but everything to do with a thriving society. Oh, by the way, the Marriage Act discriminates. Yep, it has lower regards for certain people. Negative discrimination in the Marriage Act. This is the Same-Sex Marriage Act, remember, because you can't marry a relative. You can't marry someone under the age of 16. You can't marry someone if you're already married to someone else. So much for love is love, eh? Anyway, that's what I would have said. Number two, the second thing. During the abortion section of the interview, Jack was keen to emphasise that the majority of New Zealanders supported the legalisation of abortion. And you would have heard me push back and say that while they may support it in principle, their support drops dramatically for second and third trimester abortions. In the media, what you'll hear is that 60 to 70% of Americans support Roe v. Wade. But when they're told what Roe v. Wade allows, which is up to full-term abortion, that quickly changes. The Gallup poll that I mentioned in the interview with Jack says that only 13% of Americans support abortions in the third trimester. And by the way, these are allowed in New Zealand. And only 28% support them in the second trimester. These are also allowed in New Zealand. I wish I'd pushed this issue further because the research actually shows that there was next to no support for the abortion law that was introduced in New Zealand, the radical abortion law. For example, look at the research, which Jack admitted that he had read. 56% of women think the time limit should be less than the current 20 weeks that it was under the old law. And of course, what we've done is we've extended it to now full term. Just 9% support the limit for an abortion of 20 weeks. So that's the old law. And only 4% believed it should be later than 20 weeks, including up to birth, which of course is what Parliament voted for. Yep, just 4%. Oh, and 90% oppose sex-selective abortions in New Zealand. Yet, there is no prohibition on sex-selection abortions in our new law. Yeah, I would have said to Jack, the majority of New Zealanders do not support the radical abortion law that our Parliament voted in 2020. And the third area is that in the Q&A interview, he made a statement to the effect that Greenpeace's research had met the standard of education because it had been peer-reviewed and ours hadn't. And that's why they got charitable status and we didn't. And, at the time of the interview, I wasn't sure whether that was correct. So I had to answer the question as best I could. But the statement is actually completely false. In the decision by the Charities Board to deregister Greenpeace back in 2018, it says this: the board considers that most of Greenpeace's reports can be characterised as propaganda or cause under the guise of research. Most of the reports do not have an independent and objective starting point. The reports do not provide balanced, objective discussion of those topics. In almost all reports, research is presented in a way designed to support Greenpeace's point of view. Greenpeace has not provided evidence that the reports have been peer-reviewed by an appropriately qualified independent person. However, what the courts did do was acknowledge that one report of Greenpeace's had been peer-reviewed. It was called Trajectory Analysis of Deep Oil Spill Scenarios in New Zealand. But Family First also had the same comment about one of our reports, the NZIER report. So the High Court decision in 2020, which gave Greenpeace charitable status, actually reaffirmed what the Charities Board said, that one report had been peer-reviewed. In Family First's judgment released on Tuesday, the Supreme Court refers to peer reviews, but only of that one report from Greenpeace. But the Supreme Court also acknowledges our NZIER report. So, both Family First and Greenpeace have one report that the respective courts have accepted as meeting their undefined standard of peer-reviewed, whatever that may mean. The Charities Board argues that the other reports of both Greenpeace and Family First are designed to support our points of view, i.e. advocacy. See, in my view, Q&A have given misleading information about both the quality of research by both organisations, Family First and Greenpeace, and the justification for both organisations being treated differently in the courts. And this is where we find the judgment and accompanying media release of the Supreme Court most disturbing. Have a look. It says, Family First's engagement with issues such as abortion, assisted dying, prostitution and censorship are not subsets of its wider purpose of supporting marriage and family. The court really focused on our supporting marriage and family. But look at this bit. This differs from advocacy for ends like human rights and protection of the environment, which Greenpeace held were themselves charitable ends. Family First advocacy on the above issues was not ancillary to its express purpose of supporting marriage and family. This is the key point to understand. The court is saying that the religions of human rights, including sexuality and gender, and environmentalism are acceptable things to advocate for, but to present and use decades of research proving that family formation and structure matters is unacceptable and apparently discriminatory. Jack Tame is effectively saying that education on these matters is relevant, education on family structure and the benefits of marriage don't count. That should concern us all. And hopefully, the problem with the Supreme Court decision that we were deregistered simply because we want to promote marriage and family, and that's unacceptable to the state now, hopefully that's one point that I got across strongly in the interview.